Happy birthday,
It's my
Suzanne.
birthday. It's my birthday today. I'm 60 years old. We're at Colossal Cave Mountain County Park near Tucson, Arizona, and we're about to take the morning tour into Colossal Cave first thing on my birthday.
And then we're going on into Tucson for some birthday
festivities.
Dinner and a shower at least.
We'll see you inside.
Okay. I think this was it was honor of Frank Schmidt. It says pioneer whose foresight, untiring effort preserved this beauty spot for posterity. But I think it was started by the miners. They've got this interesting thing over here where you can sludge for your own gemstones. Sluice. And a little view of the valley.
It was very peaceful and calm.
Okay, do me a favor, go to that spot right there. I'll close up behind you here.
Going into the caves. I wonder if the camera will pick up.
You know what this smells like? My dad's attic and my dad's barn. I think he has bats.
Yeah, you can't get that on film, but there is a smell.
We get as much of that smell from raccoons.
Raccoons, well.
They come in and they hide in the cracks and the crevices and stuff like that during the day.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're a little bigger and a little less housebroken.
Yeah.
So when we get damp weather, which we have had lately, we get reminded.
Yeah.
Okay, start with a little bit of background history while we let our eyes get used to the darkness here. And I'll start with the gate up there. The three horizontal bars up at the top of that mark the original opening of the cave. There's a rabbit hole. Crab came up to that. You had to belly crawl down through the rabbit hole.
crawl in there.
Wow.
And for some reason, they didn't think that was good for tourism. So they cut open the gate and they put in the stairs and the lights and the railings and all that sort of stuff. They did that in the 1930s. But the cave has been used by people going back to about 900 AD. First people who used it were the Hohokam. They lived in a village in the valley down below us between 900 AD and 1450 AD. And came up and used this room of the cave apparently for ceremonial purposes. This is the only room that's got smoke-stained ceilings. And when the cave was rediscovered in 1879, this little area over behind you is piled with deer skulls, antlers, pottery, stuff like that. Kind of like a shrine of some sort.
Were there any pictures that they leave?
No, that's what's interesting, because the same tribe on the surface in other places did leave pictographs and stuff, but not down here.
Not down here.
Which is interesting, because usually you associate it the other way
Yeah,
around.
with caves.
They disappeared around 1450 AD. There's a lot of mystery about exactly what happened there. We do know there were droughts going on in the area, but other tribes were also coming into the area. So we don't know if there's conflict, starvation, whether, there's a lot of possibilities, but nobody knows for sure. In any case, the culture disappeared. People vanished. The cave was abandoned for the next 400 years. It was rediscovered in 1879 by a cowboy who was out running up cattle in the hillside out there. And he sees that rabbit hole opening. For some reason, jumps off his horse and goes down the rabbit hole.
Some guys.
Yeah. Comes back out, tells people about it. So other people come up, start exploring it and using it for different purposes. In 1887, this was used as an outlaw hideout. We'll talk more about that later. And in 1922, there's a guy named Frank Schmidt. Heard about the cave, came up and explored it, and decided to turn it into a tourist attraction. Staked a couple mining claims on it to get control of it, and started giving the first guided tours in 1923. And back then, you would have paid 25 cents for a tour and belly crawled down through the rabbit hole with a handful of candles, hopefully enough to get you back out again. Okay.
So it was never used for mining or anything? It was just a natural cave?
It was. There was a mining claim on it, two mining claims on it, and they actually mined over on the east side of it. We're in the western edge of the cave. It's kind of horseshoe-shaped things. It comes out and there's an opening way over on the east side, about a quarter mile from here. And they did mine an area, actually about a tenth of a mile over, there's an entrance that they mined for bat guano.
Okay.
And that was just about 100 years ago. And on a fairly small scale.
Yeah.
Just basically give them rights to a mining claim so they could control it until they set it up as a business.
But it wasn't for minerals.
No, this is mineralogically pretty poor. The only mineable mineral we've got here would be gypsum, and we don't have it in mineable qualities or quantities.
So I just want to make sure the people on YouTube hear that it was bat guano. that they were mining. When your camera flashes, does that mean something?
I think
It means it's running.
Oh,
If it
I'll cut
explodes,
that
we'll
out.
get it. Okay, ready to go?
Yeah. And you've counted every one of these steps.
I didn't. Several people I know have tried. Usually we get kids on here counting as they go, and about 2/3 of the way in there they lose.
Because you had the number.
Yeah.
What was it, 360?
363 is what they say. and
Okay.
I'm not going to swear to it, but that's what I'm told.
Slippery there. Be careful.
Little edges you don't want to fall.
Oh, yeah. And these steps in that, how long have these been? Like, after you belly crawled, you got all this, or no?
They put these in the 1930s. Actually, they mapped and planned it in 33, built it from 34 through 38.
Wow, okay.
All hand labor and hard sweat.
It seemed to be a time in America where tourism was starting to be something people were interested
people
in.
had to have mobility to be able to get around and see things. So.
Yeah, he started, and we saw that in the
It's hard to
national
be a
park.
tourist on a covered wagon.
Automobiles.
Right.
Wow.
Okay, this is, usually the wow factor here is all the neat speleothems and formations that we have around here. Speleothems translates literally as cave things, but it means rocks formed by dripping or flowing water in a cave. They come in two basic groups, the drip stones and the flow stones. The drip stones include stalactites and stalagmites, and a bunch of others we'll see as we go deeper. And if you have trouble keeping those sorted out as to which is which, a stalactite sticks tight to the ceiling, a stalagmite might get that tall someday. Flow stone is where water flows over a rock and it coats it with a mineral. It might make a smooth coat, might look like melted candle wax or like melted ice cream. But it's all made out of a mineral called calcite. This is calcite.
Yeah.
It's a crystal. You can see the light goes right through it. This is a stalagmite. The top's been polished. If we did a cross-section cut, you'd see tree ring-like layers of crystals in here. And when we get down to the living room, I can show you an example of that. This is the same as all the rest of them, except for a 10,000-year layer of dust permeated into the surface.
Okay.
This one, by contrast, has been rubbed for almost 100 years. People are rubbing it for good luck.
Good luck.
Supposedly, if you do so, you won't bang your head on his bigger brothers further down the stairs. And I won't guarantee it to work, but you're welcome to give it a try.
I'll give it a shot.
But the way this forms, as rain falls from the sky, it absorbs carbon dioxide, becomes very mild carbonic acid, hits the ground, the acid can dissolve calcium carbonate out of the limestone, carries it in solution down into the ground until it gets to an air chamber like this, a room, where the carbon dioxide can leave the water. It's like a soda going flat when you open the bottle. It degasses, it becomes less acidic. The minerals come out of solution and stick to the floors, walls, ceilings in this crystal structure in all the shapes that you see. So, okay, let's go a little bit deeper.
Okay, your head.
Here, Jeffrey, you're in front. I just wanted to get that.
Good idea, so.
Okay, as we come down this direction, you look up to the right, you see more formations up in there. They call that the kingdom of the elves. Somebody thought all those little stalagmites looked like a family of elves climbing the hillside. But then we come this way, and there's a very un-elf-like stalactite named Fang. He's got a bad habit of biting tall people in the forehead.
Watch out, Jim.
So be careful. He has taken people off my tour.
Should have put the guard around the other side.
A bit of calcite crystals up and through here.
Wow.
All right, this room I'm going to use as a classroom and give you guys a crash course on cave geology as it applies to this cave. But I'd like to ask you if you've been in other caves and which ones, maybe I can make some comparison.
We were in a cave in Idaho. It was on an old farmer's land, and it had a sign out saying $8 and come in, and you can.
It's huge.
It was really big.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't remember the name of it
but
either,
he sent us in alone, so we didn't have a guide.
Okay, and you found your way back out.
Yeah.
All right, then I'll give you some general background and I'll toss in a couple other caves that I know of as a comparison. The rock around us is limestone. It's the Escabrosa limestone formations, fossil remains of a bed of an ocean that was here 310 to 320 million years ago. Obviously the ocean's gone, but everything that sank to the bottom of it built up into this calcium-rich mud that eventually got compressed down into limestone, which is more or less nature's concrete. There's another ocean was here several million years later, about 265 million years later, or from now, and it created 2 layers of limestone. That's the Archean layer. So we had this limestone bed across this region. About 50 million years ago, the Catalina Mountains punched up through it. It's a granite mountain range just north of Tucson, pushes its way up, splits the limestone. Part of the limestone gets pushed south, and then over the next 30 million years, the Rincon Mountains break away from the Catalinas and drift southward, pushing the limestone the rest of the way south. And it's like pushing a blanket across a table. It starts folding up on itself. If you look down in our valleys down here, look east, you'll see all this nice folded rock. It's really picturesque. But you can't fold rock that much without it breaking, without cracks forming there. We call them fault lines. And this cave is built on a network of about 40 intersecting fault lines. Those fault lines allow water to penetrate. And this is typical of most caves around the world. Some of them are down in the ground deeper, but the fractures still are what allow the water to come in. Most caves, probably the one up in Idaho, definitely, let's say Kartchner down southeast of here, water comes in from above, it picks up humic acids and other soil acids, carbonic acid from the sky, and it goes down in and it percolates in the water table and dissolves its way through the limestone and creates these passages. In this cave, and about 15% of the other caves around the world, that doesn't happen. Instead, we get hot water pushed up from below. Carlsbad would be another example of this, where hot water gets forced up from below carrying sulfur, and the sulfur turns water into sulfuric acid. And acid eats holes in limestone. Take a piece of limestone, drop it in a glass of vinegar, it'll bubble. And then you get a river of hot sulfuric acid, you can imagine it does a little better than that. And if you look at here, that kind of bubbled look where we get bubble columns going up, that's from hydrogen sulfide gas percolating up, catching in little pockets. Hydrogen sulfide creates a sulfuric acid, it eats a hole in the rock and bubbles up to the next section. So all through here you get this really neat bubbly acid-etched look to the whole thing. And we also get gypsum crystals in the deep parts of the cave, and that's another characteristic of sulfuric formed caves. Carlsbad again being another one. This remains an underwater cave for a while, but eventually either it gets lifted up or the water table drops. In any case, we wind up with air chambers, air passages, and that's when water dripping in from above can deposit the minerals to build stalactites and stalagmites and stuff. A shield formation over here where water gets pushed out sideways. Up above you, there's a drapery formation, looks like curtains or drapes coming down. And we'll see others as we go through. And these all formed basically during the Pleistocene, about a 2.5 million period of ice age. During that period, Tucson was a cool, damp, evergreen forest.
Wow, who'd imagine
that? That
that?
has changed. Got hot, got dry, turned into a desert. About 10 to 12,000 years ago is when the desertification started. Basically, the forest retreated up the mountains. As it died out in the lower elevations, it remained on the upper parts. So you go up to like Mount Lemmon to the north or Madera Canyon to the south, the forest is still there. They're called sky islands, islands of forest in a sea of desert. But we're out here in the desert. Desert up above, and it started drying out down here as well. No longer enough snowfall or rainfall or anything up above to keep this thing live and dripping. With one little exception at this point. It's been gradually drying out for thousands of years. If you follow this fault line into the mountain about 1/10 of a mile, there is a small room back there about 1/3 the size of this one that is still dripping. And even that, I think, is just going to go away before much longer. So, but that's where we are today. That's about 310, 320 million years of history thrown at you. We have a dry, dormant cave, biologically active, but geologically not much happening.
So if the rains came again, it would start dripping?
It would have to be a lot of rains.
Yeah.
Like it had to be a climate change, not just a
major,
rainstorm.
Major climate change, not just a little bit, but a major one. Again, our valleys would have to fill up, it'd be almost like biblical proportions or something.
Right.
Because it was a climate change that dried the cave.
Yeah. Okay, that's about 320 million years of history, so I'm going to back down and give you 1 year of history in this part of the cave over here, the bottom right-hand corner in particular. 1887, there's a guy named Josiah Smith, alias Kid Smith, and he's a train robber. He and his gang robbed the Southern Pacific train 4 times that year down along the Cienega Creek, about 2 miles south of here. Hit the train, head for the hills, disappear. And the theory is that this is where they disappeared to. At least one of the times it was. In October of '87, as they left the train, the posse chased them up, supposedly into the park area. Before it was a park, chased them up toward the opening of the cave. Smith and his gang dove down the rabbit hole, got away from the posse. But the posse surrounded them, didn't want them to get away. They had to abandon their horses on the surface, so the posse seizes the horses.
Yeah.
And surrounds the place and waits for them to come back out. And these guys don't want to chase them down into the cave. You go into a dark cave full of upset gunfighters. You're the guy holding a torch. You're the target. So they're going to starve them out. And they sit back and they wait for them to have to come back out again. And it probably would have worked better if there wasn't the back door.
This is the door.
That's the way to the back door. If you go down there, there's a crack that drops down in. There's a passage that connects to a series of other passages that works its way about a quarter mile east of here and pops out at the back door. And the back door looks like a gopher hole from on top. If you're 15, 20 feet away from it, you don't see it.
Wow.
And there's a ridge between the front door and the back door. So while the patio is occupied by the posse, what's now the patio, they don't see anything. They're shielded from being able to see these guys, and they slip out the back door. They drop down into the valley. They steal horses from a ranch, and they keep on going. Well, they wind up down in Wilcox, feeling pretty good about themselves. They outsmarted the posse, they got far away, and they're feeling safe. So they haul up in a cantina and start celebrating, which is a bad idea. Pretty soon they're talking, pretty soon everybody knows what's going on. Somebody sends a message up to the sheriff.
They're bragging.
Yeah, he sends his posse after them. They catch up with them outside of Wilcox. There's a gunfight. 2 outlaws get killed. Smith was one of them. Another one got captured and thrown in jail. But the gold and silver has never been recovered. It's vanished. And the legend is that it's still hidden
It's
somewhere
in
deep
here
the
somewhere.
cave. And I have crawled through miles of this place and I haven't seen it
Haven't
yet.
seen it.
Do you have to crawl through this thing?
There's actually several different ways to get in there.
That back door, I mean.
Oh yeah, I've been all the way through to the back
You have to
door.
crawl through it. You can't walk through it.
There's
We're
crawls,
not
there's
going in
squeezes,
there,
there's
Jeffrey.
climbs. It's pretty adventurous, yeah.
Wow, for them to have discovered it themselves, I mean.
Actually, you know, if you've got a couple openings in a line, and this is a relatively horizontal cave rather than a vertical one, which is a great help for that. The wind goes by, the natural flow of air outside
You can
matches
feel
that.
it.
You don't feel it down here,
Oh.
but if you've got a candle,
Yeah.
the air exchange, you get a Venturi effect that draws air through. And we get
draws.
constant air exchange going on, you just don't feel any of the breeze. But a candle will show which way things are moving.
Yeah, okay.
So you get into, especially narrow passages, you can see
Yeah.
what's happening.
Okay.
That sounds like a Zane Grey novel.
Yeah, it would be great. Actually, somebody should write up the whole story and maybe make a movie out of it. I don't know. Okay, now if you're going to go crawling into deep parts of the cave, either treasure hunting or just crawling around, you want to find your way back out someday. The way you do that is you navigate by rock. Look for rocks that you can give a name to or a meaning to, so when you see them again, you know where you are, you know what direction you've got to go.
I see a cat.
Well, we've got the witch up behind it.
A witch.
This is her eye, her long
Oh,
nose.
definitely.
Open mouth with one snaggly
Yes.
tooth, about to bite into a limestone.
Yes.
cookie. Her hair trails behind
And her hair.
Yeah. And she's a good witch. If you get lost in the cave and find your way back to her, her nose points in the direction of the opening. She helps you find your way home again. And because she's such a good witch, she's got a cat keeping
Yeah,
her
I saw
company.
that.
Cat named Shadow. You can see the shadow
Oh,
on the
look at
wall
his
behind it.
shadow.
And then another friend over here named Mr. Magoo.
Oh, Mr.
His
Magoo.
Has a cup of coffee.
It is.
Yeah.
It's Mr. Magoo.
Okay, the next thing we're going to look at is an extension of this room with natural cave floor. This is an artificial floor. It's like a shelf or a deck. The real floor is underneath it. And we're going to go down that passage onto a balcony where we can see what that natural floor looks
Here,
like.
Jeffrey. When we're walking.
Come on down.
How long have you been discovering this cave?
Oh, about 8 or 9 years.
Okay, and you just, when in your spare time, you just go off and.
Well, actually, it's part of my job at this point.
Uh,
I initially came here, I was brought in as a biologist to go into the deep parts and see what kind of biological activity there was. And we did find some cool stuff. And then I helped out with the wild tours, and I'll tell you about those in a minute. And eventually, the guy who used to do the wild tours left and had me come in and start doing the wild tours and doing the other ones too. Okay, up on the, well, let's start down below. That's the natural cave floor. That's what. Okay, this is the natural cave floor. That's what we'd be boulder hopping across if we didn't have this shelf underneath
Wow.
us. And you can see it is just a shelf sticking out over space. We do have people who like this side of the fence better. I'm one of them. And we do what we call wild cave tours, where we put on helmets and go crawling into the deep parts of the cave. You're walking on a half-mile of walk today, but there's 3 more miles of cave. So lots of places to go crawling.
Wow.
And on the advanced wild tour, take people down this wall, circle around those rocks, go back into that little hole back there. That zigzags its way down about 2 stories. And it goes into the mountain about 1/10 of a mile following that crack, and it eventually breaks to the right, works its way over to the east side of the cave where the outlaws came out. I did it a few weeks ago with some soldiers from Fort Huachuca, and it took us about 4.5 to 5 hours to get all the way through and come out the other side.
See, the cave we went into had a very flat bottom and all the, formations and stuff.
Yeah.
So we could walk very easily along it was almost like a riverbed.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
like
It
a
wasn't
wash.
this,
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot. This is a labyrinthine cave,
Right,
again,
yeah.
formed by water percolating up from below, so it affected it differently. If it's formed by water flowing through it, you can carve it out, smooth it out, and
Yeah.
more civilized that way.
Yeah.
Okay, up on the wall up here, we've got a slice of cave bacon. Thin sheet of calcite crystal coming down the wall. Starts as a little dribble mark like this, builds into ridges like those over there, and eventually can get to be a big sheet of bacon like the one way in the back there. Or like this little guy up here that I can backlight. And if I put my light
Oh,
up
yeah.
behind him, that looks a little more like bacon when I do
That's
that. So, okay, from here, we're going back up into the room we just came out of, and I'll take you to a different part of the cave.
here, Jeffrey. Got it.
This is our cave weather station, and we don't get much weather. It's always the same temperature. Humidity fluctuates a little bit, but it's usually one side or the other of 50%. We've had some rains of late, so it's up closer to 60% right now. By the end of June, when it's our hottest, driest time, it gets down almost as low as 40, but otherwise it's in that gap.
It's not bad.
No, it's pretty comfortable.
Yeah.
110 out there in June, it's this temperature down here, that's pretty tolerable.
Yeah, you should have some camping available. Then you get tourists.
Okay, look up above us here, we've got a fault line with 2 colors of rock along either side there.
Yeah.
It's 2 different layers of limestone, and it's called a slip fault. It's where the 2 different layers ground against each other. At one time, it was seismically pretty active. The fault line goes through the archway overhead, and the ones up ahead of us here. But nowadays, it hasn't been seismically active. It's been very stable for probably about 10,000 years or more. And I'm very happy to leave it that way. Because everywhere we go today, we're walking on fault lines. That's where the water came in to carve out the passages. Little hole called the bottomless pit. Do not drop your camera there. We have had people do that. It's not good for them.
Oh my goodness.
We can usually get the parts back out, but that's about the best I'll say.
So when you see these little holes like that one back there, is that another passageway?
That's another passage. Actually, when we come back
Yeah.
this way, I'll point that out to you, tell you
Okay.
about it.
All right.
These are some artifacts left behind by the Hohokam people, but they didn't leave them this deep in the cave. They left them in that first room we were in. The anthropologist who came out here who did the work on them, is a guy named Byron Cummings. He was a professor at the University of Arizona, and in his write-ups of his findings, he named this place Colossal Cave. So that's when it stuck. He eventually became president of the University of Arizona.
In terms of colossal, how does it rate for other colossal caves in the world?
It's a good sized cave, but you get compared to, let's say, Mammoth in Kentucky.
Yeah.
They used to boast about 365 miles of passages,
Yeah.
Wow.
and now they're up over 400. They found another section. So that, to me, is Mammoth.
You got your
Colossal,
mammoth,
maybe,
you got your colossal,
yeah,
then you
it's all
got your
a matter of
dawn.
what you
You
compare
done
it to, I guess. Actually, it's a pretty good sized cave. Most caves are not anywhere near. Mammoth is the biggest, longest one.
Do you guys open this at Halloween to have hide and seek, or would that be too
well,
dangerous?
we actually have tours at night on Halloween. We have volunteers come in and help haunt the place. People come in, we shut the electricity off. They've got a glow stick that they have to find their way through.
That would be
And we have two different colors of glow sticks, color coded, so the kids they don't want to be too badly scared, they'll carry one color so that the volunteers will know not to jump out and terrify them.
That's a good idea.
The others will make up for it. Okay, this room's got a few things we can talk about. And I'll start with this wall right here. This crust was formed by water oozing out of the rock, depositing minerals on the surface. And mostly calcite, sometimes a little bit of aragonite. But in some places it formed nodules of calcite crystal that look like popcorn. So they call it cave popcorn. Okay, the other two things I got for this room both go back to how it's been used. One starts in the 1930s, one starts in the late 1950s. The 1930s is a group called the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, job program during the Great Depression. Everybody's out of work, government creates these programs that people can join like they're going into the army. Only instead of getting a rifle and going out to fight somewhere, they got a shovel and go off to build things. And they build roads and bridges and campgrounds. In this area, they built the Mount Lemmon Highway, they did a lot of work in Sabino Canyon, and a few other places. And in this cave, they built all the walkways, they put in the railings, wired for electric lights, and we still have 1930s vintage wiring in most of the lighting areas. They built a gift shop where you bought your tickets, and they built a bunch of other stuff around here. While they did all this, they lived in a campground in the valley down below us, and they'd get out and they'd meet people in their spare time, especially local gals. Some of the guys ended up getting married. But living in a campground in the middle of nowhere, they didn't have any fancy wedding places available. So they used that room right up behind me. That's the wedding chapel. You'll see a rock in the middle there, a stalagmite that we call the altar. It's got a natural lip on the right side. They'd get a preacher to come out from town. He could rest his Bible on that lip. A couple getting married would stand on the left side. And during the 1930s, about 23 couples got married up in there.
Wow.
And we still have weddings. I heard there was one scheduled for later this month.
Oh, so you still make it available. You close it off just for what reason? Just
to keep people directed down this way. I actually want to change the gate on that. I brought the maintenance guy in recently to take a look at making that a little more passable. Because we do take people up there for some of the extra tours, the off-path tours.
Yeah.
And for a bride to jump over that bar is a little bit challenging.
Would be a little bit challenging.
Okay, so 1950s, late 1950s, you got a new director takes over the park. He's got friends in Hollywood. He invites them to come out here and make movies, figuring get this up on the big screen. It's free advertising. They come out and make some of the worst movies I've ever seen. Grade B or worse, 1950s horror flicks about monsters that live in caves and things like that. Of course, I've got some of them in my DVD collection.
Might have seen a couple.
Some of them are on YouTube. You can track them down. Night of the Lepus.
Night of the Lepus, I love that. The giant rabbit.
That was done partly here, partly down toward Idaho, a little bit of it over in Benson, but yeah, a bunch of it was
Giant rabbits attack people.
Yeah, big fluffy bunnies with ketchup on their mouths. And every bit as bad as you can imagine. It's a classic of its sort.
Rabbits going over little houses. It's just funny.
Yeah, miniature houses with big fluffy rabbits. It's great. Incredible petrified world. John Carradine is a scientist, builds a diving bell, sinks to the bottom of the ocean, rolls into Colossal Cave. They spend the rest of the movie climbing up through this dry, dusty, well-lit cave looking for the surface. And in this room up here, they find some old guy who's been living there for 30 years. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it doesn't slow him down. It comes out better than Frankenstein Island, where they do find the Frankenstein monster in a pool of water at the bottom of the cave. And that's one of its more rational parts. So we had a bunch of bad ones, but we also had some better ones. In recent years, I worked with National Geographic over on the east side of the cave, filming bats and bugs for a program they were doing. And just a little over a year ago, we had a movie crew in here for several nights in a row doing a comedy movie. I got to work with them after hours, come in about 6 in the evening and leave about 6 in the morning. And the movie is called, or it hasn't been released yet, it will be released under the name How to Make a Deal with the Devil. It stars a woman named Shannon Doherty.
Oh, yeah, we know who she is.
90210 and some other stuff. She makes a great devil.
I'm sure she does.
She's actually a lot of fun to work with. But the crew was great. So we had that, and that was one of my highlights.
Is this where the devil lives?
This is hell. Actually, in that other room we were in, she had a great big throne, and She's bargaining with people for their souls. One of them is a guy named Zach Ward, who, if you've seen Christmas Story, he plays the bully, Scott
Oh, yeah,
Farkas.
yeah. Scott Farkas.
Yeah. So, anyway, so we got a bunch of these things going on. But the one that everybody has heard about, or the group that everyone's heard about down here, is Sesame Street.
Oh,
They did a little thing down here, part of a series called Sesame Street Goes Western. And the episode that involved this room was called The Treasure of the Lost Cookies. The storyline here is that Cookie Monster and Big Bird come down this hallway behind you by candlelights, treasure map in one hand, candle in the other. And as they come around the bend, they look right up behind you there and they see that eye of a monster looking at them. That is a Tyrannosaurus Rex, T-Rex. There's the brow, the nose, the mouth of a Tyrannosaurus. So they panicked and ran. Cookie Monster ran that way. Big Bird ran this way through this Big Bird shape.
oh.
Crashes through the wall, finds
I
the
see
cookies
it,
on
yeah.
the other side, everybody's happy ever after. It's actually a natural formation called a keyhole formation, but you put a cameraman in front of it, it can be anything.
Yeah, yeah.
So who came up with the Sesame Street? Some of the children tourists? I mean, the whole...
Oh, I don't know where the concept came from. They did it, I think it was in 1987
Big
is when they did the filming down
Oh,
there
okay.
for it. So.
Yeah, it's cute.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody looked at that and said, oh, I know who to call.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
Yeah. It's imagination.
Yeah, and we have a bunch of others. We had a Super Bowl commercial filmed out on the patio back a while and a bunch of other stuff like that.
You know, some of the caves I've been in, there's always been living things of some sort. There doesn't seem to be anything living in this one.
This side of the cave is less biologically active than the other one because the lights, the impact of noise and everything.
People in here.
Yeah, there's more bats use the other side of the cave. And again, 3 more miles of cave out there, so it's quieter, darker places. They come here to sleep, so they're gonna go to the quiet, dark places to do it. Much more activity on that side, and as a result, bats are the nutrient bringers to the cave. They're the basis of the food chain. You get the bat going on the floor, you get mold growing on that, you get little things come out and eat that mold, and other things come out and eat those things, and works its way up the system. So we do actually, on the eastern side, have fairly active biological stuff.
Yeah.
But even in caves, generally, populations of animals and plants are much lower. There's not that much activity, there's not much input from the sun, all that sort of stuff that generates a really active cave. So, all right, let's continue up this way.
Here, Jeffrey.
Going the way of the Cookie Monster.
Things found deep in the cave over the years. Sign hints that they're outlaw stuff, but don't really know whose they are. Duster. It's a type of jacket that cowboys would have worn back in the 1880s, 1890s to keep the dust off them. It's linen, it's for dust, not for warmth. The bottle, I suspect, came out of a room on the east side of the cave that during Prohibition had a still set up in it, and they ran bootleg liquor out of there. The still is on the patio up near the restrooms now.
Everything but the gold they found.
Yeah, at least nobody's admitted to finding it. Okay, if you'd been here back in the 1930s crawling around in the deep parts of the cave, nowadays we wear a helmet with an LED on the front, but back then you would have had a miner's cap with a carbide lamp. In a carbide lamp, you put calcium carbide pebbles in the bottom chamber,
Oh my gosh.
water in the top, water drips onto the calcium carbide, and it gives off acetylene gas. So you're basically wearing a acetylene blowtorch on your forehead for light.
Yeah.
You get as much light as you do out of my flashlight, but you've got a hot little flame shooting out of your head. So you don't reach up and scratch your head too casually, and if you're climbing a rope, you don't want to look at it real closely.
I know how many accidents happen.
There are some, I'm sure.
We've been camping and it's just so easy to make accidents.
Yeah, and that's with being able to see everything you're
Right.
doing and not being confined.
Yeah, you lose things
Yeah.
and you just...
Okay, you were asked about this tunnel as we came in here. This is what's called a solution tunnel. It goes uphill, and it's from the acid bubbling up through here and carving it out, and reaches pretty much a dead end up there.
Okay.
But there's a crack that comes in that water at one time did come down through to deposit minerals. We get some stalagmites and stuff at the other end of it. This dead end's underneath, well, as you're leaving the parking lot today, you'll be facing a valley on the side of the mountain with cliff faces. This dead end's underneath one of those cliff faces. But about halfway up, there's a tunnel that breaks to the left. And I'll show you where that comes out. That comes out over the archways up there, that tunnel up there.
Oh, okay.
And actually on the other side of that, there's some fossils. So when I take people up in there, I can show them the fossils. We do this on the wild tours, and we'll come out through that. That takes us down to that little hole down there. We pop up out of that, and we chimney across the rest of the way. That's walking with 1 foot on one wall, 1 foot on the other wall, try not to fall
Try
down the
not to
middle.
fall. Like Santa.
You need cave insurance for those tours.
Well, we coach, when we do the wild tours, we have 2 guides, one on the front, one in the back, and we keep the groups small so we can coach very carefully.
Yeah.
And so far, we've had high survival rate.
Now those are the ones that you had advertised as $30 or something up there?
There's a series of different ones. The $30 one is the ladder tour that goes in a little ways, fairly milder stuff than the others. The next one up would be the intermediate wild tour, costs a little more, takes a little longer, and then the advanced one
Yeah, it was
goes
90
through
or
the whole
something.
cave,
Yeah.
takes about up to 4 or 5 hours.
Wow.
And that is a little more demanding. There's some tight squeezes and stuff like that.
And you get some pretty serious cave people on that one.
Yeah. But we also get a lot of beginners who've never done it before and are just blown away. They want to know what.
Do you ever let experienced cavers come in by themselves?
Not by themselves, because for insurance purposes, we have to know who's in the cave and what
Yeah.
they're doing. But we do work with some of the local caving organizations, and they'll have meetings here and do cave cleaning and stuff like that in exchange for use of that. And yeah, we can. Those people we know and we work with, so they're okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay, got a question for you. What happens when you punch a rock?
I have no idea.
hurt your hand.
Hurt your hand.
Hollow.
It's hollow.
It's actually a big tuning fork.
Yes.
Every once in a while, we find one somewhere in there. There's one that I know you can tap with one finger and it rings like a bell.
I wonder if you could find various ones to actually create a kind of a scale.
There's Luray Caverns, I've heard, has a place where they have several of these things that have different notes, and they can actually play a little tune.
This is a G, some form of a G.
Yeah.
I'll take your word for
She's a
it.
doctor in music.
Okay, I'm not, so I'll have to. The only thing I know how to play is the radio. Okay, walking on some cave ice. If you rub your feet between the tape, you'll see why it's called that. It's pretty slick. That forms on water in caves, but not by freezing. It's by crystallization. When you get a pool of water at the bottom of a cave, it's come through all this limestone. It's picked up a lot of calcium carbonates, so it's very calcium rich. And it's very prone to crystallizing out, losing that calcium. So little dust settles on the water, it starts crystallizing on that, and it can trigger a crystallization process where pretty soon you get a film over the whole surface of the water, and it just gets thicker and thicker until you wind up with this solid crust like that. Now this room is a few things we can talk about. One of them is where you are. You are now 6 stories below the parking lot.
Wow.
You're parked right about there. We're down here in the basement. And there's a couple stories I can tell about this room in terms of its history, especially involving a guy named Frank Schmidt. 1923, he's the guy who's going to start opening this up as a tourist attraction and giving the first guided tours. But before you can give a guided tour, he's got to figure out where all the passages go. So he comes down with a couple friends. They use this as a base camp. They spend 6 days underground mapping passages. This is the largest flat dirt floor we have in 3.5 miles of cave.
Perfect place for
Yeah, yeah. So he does that, gets a bunch of the cave mapped at that point. We've added some since then. And then about 15 years later, the CCC has built all the walkways. They've also built the buildings up on top, including the gift shop. Wasn't built as a gift shop, though. It was built as a house for Frank Schmidt to live in. Nice house, thick stone walls, but it didn't have modern air conditioning. So in the heat of summer, old Frank Schmidt would set up table and chairs down here, and this was his living room. So we still call it Frank's living room. I would have done the same, 110 up there in
Yeah,
June. This
why
temperature
not?
down here, it's not going to take long to sort that out. Okay, and then up above us, there's some really cool formations called helictites. Crazy little ones that ignore gravity, go whatever direction they feel like growing. Some of them look like worms coming out of the rock, some like knife blades or other odd shapes and stuff. Some of them turn around and go back into the rock. So there's a pretty wild collection up in here. Up right over here is a broken stalactite. It's unfortunately got broken, but it does give us a chance to see the tree ring-like layers of crystal development in there. Shows that it developed in episodes. Now, it doesn't mean the cave dried out in between episodes, but it means maybe this century the water came down this way, and the next century it came down that way, etc.
I'm from Canada. We see the same thing in icicles. You know, the way
Okay,
they,
yeah.
they drip and then they get
Yep,
another
one
layer,
surge,
another
yeah,
layer,
yeah.
and then they become really thick by the end of the winter.
Okay. Now, right up overhead here, this rusty brown looking stuff is called boxwork. The mineral is iron silicate, and it's the veins in the rock after the rock has been dissolved away from it. Now you can see this piece of limestone over here with a cross section, you can see where the veins are. If that sulfuric acid comes up into that and sits on it for a while, it eats away at the limestone, but this is more closely related to quartz, so it doesn't dissolve in the acid water. It remains behind after the limestone is gone. And in deep parts of the cave, we have whole bunches of that stuff, whole rooms full of it, that we see when we do the advanced wild tour in particular. All right, the next room, we've got all kinds of neat things. You can bump your heads on if you're not careful, so come on through.
I like this kind of rock.
That's
It is.
Looks like pretty.
Little formation up here. When I first started here, they called it the Four Praying Nuns. They said it looked like four nuns gathered around praying. But one of the other guys working here said, I don't see the nuns, but there's an iguana right here.
Yeah.
So I'm always seeing the cave iguana
Iguana.
instead.
Yeah, it looks like an iguana. I agree.
And this guy is called Bone Crusher. You can imagine why. He's hanging at about face level looking for somebody.
Looking for you.
A couple of beehives around here too.
Yeah, yeah. That's all based on how fast the water's flowing. It's flowing
Right.
just a little bit at a time. It'll get a narrower thing. If it's splashing a little more, you get this lumpy white
Yeah,
beehive
yeah,
looking thing.
right.
Actually, back up a little bit, up on the wall up in here is another formation called aragonite.
Aragonite right
And it's
there.
a polymorph of calcite. It's calcium carbonate, but formed at a different temperature, so the crystal structure is a little bit different. But it's more that kind of fuzzy cauliflower.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
flowery looking,
Yeah.
like it almost is
Conch.
like alive, like coral.
Yeah. Okay, as we come up, look up in there, where my light is shining, you'll see a big wooden structure with a ladder hanging out of it.
Oh,
yeah.
We called that the mine shaft, although they didn't actually use it for mining. They used it to bring building materials into the cave from up on the surface. That goes up to the parking lot. In the old days, the CCC guys could back their trucks up and lower all the rocks, the concrete, the railings, everything down this way, rather than have to carry it around to the front door and drag it in from there.
Well,
Nowadays, though, that's 1930s vintage termite food. We don't dare climb the ladders. We're trying to stabilize that so we can save it for historic purposes. As you're leaving the parking lot today, you will see a little roof up there near the exit of the parking lot. That's the top of the mine shaft. In this flowstone formation, we call the silent waterfall, because in ancient times it sort of was a waterfall, slow motion one maybe. Water trickling in from above would have covered this with a very thin sheet of water, which drained off down below into an ancient pond that we now call the living room. We call it the waterfall, but other people look at it and say, no, it's a pipe organ, it's a wedding cake, it's a hot fudge sundae. It's been called a whole bunch of things. Up above us is a little area we call the dinosaur boneyard. There aren't really any dinosaur bones in here. Our limestone is actually older than the dinosaurs. But maybe a hip bone over here, or a skull, or a rib cage.
Oh, yeah.
When we get school groups up here, the kids will put their imaginations to work and they'll find enough pieces to build a dinosaur. All right, just a few more steps uphill. This is our bowling alley. That's the bowling ball and the bowling pin.
yeah. Or it could be a violin and a drum.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to go down some steep stairs here, small steps. So I recommend holding on to the railing, stepping carefully. I usually turn my feet slightly sideways so my toes don't hang over the edge. And then there's a forehead height rock at the bottom waiting for you, so be careful with that too.
Nice.
And here we have a fried egg formation. And this one hasn't got a name, but I like the way he lights up. But the real feature in this room is a hole in the middle of it that we call the sinkhole. If you look at the bottom, you'll see some steps down there. Those are the steps going into the living room. That's where we were just a few minutes ago. In the old days, before the stairways were built, this is the path that Frank Schmidt used to take people down there. He'd drop a rope over the edge, he and his guests would climb down, go into the living room, and then, of course, climb back up to get back out. So I hope he was selective about who he took down there.
Kind of makes it fun, though.
Yeah.
I couldn't have done it.
The other thing I usually talk about in this room are bats. Now, this is the very end of bat season. There were a couple of bats in here yesterday, which is a little bit late in the year. Usually by the end of October they've gone. And I suspect in the next week or so there won't be any left in here. This cave is too warm to hibernate, so 5 of the 7 species that live here that hibernate go up into the mountains where there's colder caves. They can hibernate there. The other 2 migrate south to Mexico for the winter and then come back in the spring. The larger bats on this side of the cave tend to be the Townsend big-eared bat and the pallid bat. Townsend is a moth specialist. It catches moths. The pallid bat will eat larger prey and a wide variety of stuff, but gets into things that other bats and other animals would usually try to avoid. It eats scorpions, the giant centipedes we have here. We have one here called Scolopendra heros. It gets to be about 8 to 10 inches long. It's a rather impressive centipede, rather toxic bite, but these bats will catch them and fly home with them for dinner. The larger bats on the eastern side of the cave tend to be the nectar-feeding bats. The long-nosed bat and the long-tongued bat. They're like the hummingbirds of the bat world. They come at night and they drink nectar from night-blooming flowers, such as the agave or the saguaro cactus. And nowadays they figured out what hummingbird feeders are all about. So if you hang hummingbird feeders on your back porch here, they'll get raided in the middle of the night. And the bats will swarm them, mob them, and fly away with their bellies bulging and leave you an empty feeder. The other 3 bats that we've got in the cave are mosquito-eating bats, or eating small insects, including mosquitoes. Those are a couple species of myotis and 1 pipistrelle. And of course, we're always happy to have them out there putting away mosquitoes. And like I said, this is about the end of bat season, so we probably won't see any more until around the end of March. All right, this is our last stop on the tour. From here, we're going to go up, look for daylight, but do you guys have any questions first?
No questions. Thank you.
Okay,
Very
sure.
informative.
All right, well, let's see if we can find daylight.
You know, just listening to you makes me remember why I hated biology, all those names. How do you remember all of them?
Actually, after a while, they just start sticking and making sense to you.
You know, it's just like you know exactly when augmented second chord is. Nobody else does.
Yeah, that would lose me. Well, my wife jokes about it. She's an arachnologist and is in the process of actually finishing up a book on the arachnids of the Southwest.
Yeah.
And she can talk Latin names all day, actually. But if you ask her what the next door neighbor's name is, she looks for a minute.
Yeah, for me, a bat's a bat.
There's big ones and little ones.
So you live in Tucson?
I actually live just outside the park.
Oh, okay.
On the other side of that hill on the south there, there's a dirt road that goes south for a couple miles, and I'm at the end of that dirt road.
Yeah, okay. Nice place to live.
I enjoy it.
Yeah.
Lots of wildlife, lots of open space.
All right, goodbye, Colossal Cave.